The video you're about to see is the discovery meeting where you're having an initial conversation with the client, presenting the strategy to them, using the workbook for the purpose of getting a finance sheet completed with them that can go off to Countrywide to get their recommendation, and you should leave the meeting with a completed finance sheet and an appointment for a next meeting. Nice to see you both. It's been a while since we sorted your mortgage out, and as we spoke about on the phone the other day, we've got this new service which is really looking at why you should have a will and beyond that trust to look after asset protection. Let me start by asking you both, why haven't you done a will yet?
Well, it's one of those things that we've been meaning to get round to for such a long time, but we just haven't got the time really.
Well, you're no different to most of my clients. They say exactly the same thing, which is why we've put this new service in place. So we'll talk about wills, we'll also talk about protecting your wider assets for the kids. So what I want to do today is just take you through a process, just show you a brochure and presentation that will give you the main risks that you're facing. I'll then just take some basic details from you. And we've engaged a specialist legal firm who've been doing this for about 15 years now. They've done hundreds of thousands of wills and trusts. They're called Countrywide Legal Services. And I'll send the paperwork across to them, and they'll come back with a bespoke recommendation for you. And then I'll come back and explain that to you, talk you through how it works. Now, just one point on what happens if you don't have a will, and I think this is the sealer for me, is if you were both to die in a car accident tonight, going out, you realise the kids would go into care. They wouldn't go to your parents or anything, they would go into care if you didn't have a will.
Well, why? Because...
Well, you've not told anyone what you want to happen to them, so the state has to take over.
Well, there's no way we'd let that happen.
No.
Fine,
That's
well
not
then,
gonna happen.
we need to put a will in place.
Okay.
So, just before we move on to that though, quickly, do you know how you own your house, this house?
I think we
Joint.
bought it together, so yeah, so it's
joint.
jointly.
Well, there's two ways of owning it jointly. I'll tell you what, I checked before I came here, and in fact you do own it as joint tenants.
Right.
And that's not the best way to do it. You should be tenants in common, which
Okay.
I'll explain through this process. Okay, now what I want to do is just run you through a couple of the points that need to be considered. If you've put the will in place and you own the property jointly, what the will normally says is that if you die, Kate, everything goes to Paul. If Paul dies, everything goes to Kate. And if you both die, it goes to the kids. Okay,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
fine.
That's what we want.
Yeah, that's what we want.
It's a good start, and we can achieve that, of course. But what it doesn't take into account is three things really. First of which is what we call bloodline protection. So that's making sure that what you've worked all your life to create in terms of assets is actually passed securely to your children, and they can then pass on to their children. And that's against two things really. One is divorce and the other is bankruptcy, which are the things that really attack people's assets. The second element of it, which is why I asked about your property, is around long-term care. At the moment your property will be taken into account after one of you dies for long-term care. What we can do by splitting the tenancy of the property is make sure then that that isn't the case, so we can protect the property again for the kids. So just by owning the property differently, you can avoid the property being assessed in that way for long-term care. Okay? And if we do all of these things correctly, and at the moment you're going to have a pretty big inheritance tax bill, or your kids will, we would obviously make sure that that was mitigated as much as possible. Okay, to help me explain it to you and to help you understand hopefully, we've got some scenarios that I can show you through. Now the scene is as you are, Paul and Kate are married and you've got two children, Charlotte and Jessica. Okay? Let's do the first scenario, which is sadly that Paul's died. And he's of course left everything to you, Kate. You do remarry, and you remarry Mr. X, let's call him, but you miss Paul terribly and you divorce him.
Right.
Okay, let me just talk you through that scenario now. So Paul's died, big hex, his assets have gone to you, Kate. You've now married Mr. X and you divorce. So let me ask you, what percentage of your assets could Charlotte and Jessica potentially lose because of that divorce?
Well, I should imagine it's going to be 50%.
It is 50%, so like with any divorce you lose 50%.
Okay.
But it's not necessarily you that's losing it, it's the kids in terms of their inheritance. Okay? So scenario 2, you've both died now, so none of this remarrying thing, and your assets have passed as you would expect to Charlotte and Jessica.
Yeah.
But they then obviously have these things that might happen to them. So let's assume Charlotte marries and then divorces. So what do you think can happen to her assets on that situation.
Well, I'm assuming the same
Yeah.
up here. Yeah.
Absolutely right. It's not
So
rocket
it's
science.
50%.
In terms of the other one we haven't talked about yet, though, is bankruptcy. So let's assume Jessica
Right.
starts a business, for some reason, economic climate as it is, it goes wrong and she goes bankrupt. How much do you think she can lose then?
Bankrupt, I should imagine that's 100%. I think that's right, 100%.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah.
So again,
Yeah.
these things are there, and I guess you wouldn't be happy with that.
No,
No,
not
no,
at
no.
all.
Well, of course not. Why would you be? Now let's forget about this divorce and marriage thing for a moment. Let's talk about just long-term care that we
Right.
mentioned very briefly earlier. So, Paul, again, you've died. Sorry, Kate, you're now looking at whether you go into care or not,
Right. Mhm.
and the consideration is how much it's going to cost. Okay, so Paul's died, the assets are passed to you, and you're looking to go into care. Now, at the moment, if you have assets over £23,000,
Right.
you will have to put your property into the pot to take some account of those costs. So,
Right.
in this scenario, your property may have to be sold or some of the value given up. So the question is, who's paying for the cost of that care?
The children.
Well, yeah,
Mm.
because you're effectively reducing their
Yeah.
inheritance. So they're paying for your care costs. That doesn't sound
Yeah.
like a good idea to me.
Mm.
No, it's
Okay.
very
Well-
sad. It's just literally happened to friends of ours.
They spent years trying to pay off their mortgage and then all gone.
Well, exactly, and we can help you avoid those things.
Okay, great.
Mhm.
Okay, so let me just explain how it actually works, so what the sort of generic solution will be. First thing we need to do is set up and write a will.
Mhm.
Okay. Then we need to look at we talked about the way you own your property, and the technical term is we sever the tenancy. And all that really means is that we move it from a joint ownership to you owning 50-50. Okay.
Right.
Now, don't worry, that hasn't any impact at all on your mortgage. You don't need to let the lender know. It's just saying to the land registry, at the point that you die, effectively you own the property 50-50. Countrywide will do all that as part of the process
Right,
if we go ahead
okay.
with it, of
Mhm.
course.
Mhm.
And then the last stage is we need to set up some trusts where all your assets will go on the point that you die. Okay, so they're just set up there. We put a tenner in them actually just to set them up,
Oh, okay.
and then they're there waiting. I think the technical phrase is dormant, ready for the money to then be received in the sad event that you die. This could be 20, 30 years' time, of course. So what I'll do now is I need to complete the finance sheet, which is your asset and liability statement, and then
Okay.
that will go off to Countrywide, and they'll come back and give that bespoke solution on these elements for you. Okay, so put that to one side for a moment. Now I need to go into the finance sheet. So I've already put your names in. I just need to ask you, what's the value of your property? I know I did the mortgage, but it's been a little while, so how much do you think it's worth now?
I'd say we had it valued last year. I'd say
Yeah,
about
about-
300,000.
Really? Oh, wow, okay, that's good.
And our
What
mortgage is 200,000. And we have no other debts.
That's 850,000. So your estate's worth £850,000.
Is it really? Never thought it'd be that much.
No.
Well, the main reason, and a lot of people forget this, is you've got life cover to pay the mortgage off. So the fact is, if you die, your mortgage is paid off and your property goes up in value, and you've got a lot of money in death in service benefits as well from your employer. Okay, well, we will talk about that when we come back with the solution from Countrywide. This now goes off, as I said, to Countrywide, and they'll come back with a bespoke solution.
How much is this likely to cost?
Well, there's no expense to you at this stage.
Okay.
So the solution will be provided because of my relationship with Countrywide. But just to give you an idea, this is a price list that they operate. I can't know exactly what they're going to come back with yet, but this will give you the sort of cost of every element of it. So I'll leave that with you.
Okay, thank
Okay,
you.
thank you very
Thanks.
much.
Okay. Before I book in to come and see you again, the other thing you need to think about is by making a will, you're going to appoint legal guardians for Jessica and Charlotte. And as we said, this whole point about them going into care, that's what you're avoiding. So
Right.
you're saying they'll go to whoever that might be. Don't
that's
talk to the
helpful.
people yet. Part of the service is that we'll talk to them and make sure they understand what their roles are. So
Nice.
right now I just need you to think
Okay.
about who you might want
Right.
to. Okay, so take that, have a look and put some time aside.
Thank you.
And I'd like to come back and see you the next Thursday evening work
Yeah, that's fine actually.
Yeah.
about 7
Yeah,
o'clock.
that's-
Okay,
7 o'clock's good.
so promise me you do those in the meantime,
I'll do that,
and
yeah.
I'll come back with a solution
Okay.
next Thursday
That's
evening.
great.
Great,
Thank you
thanks
very
for your time.
much.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much.
Thank you.